Welcome to another deep dive. We do things a bit differently here. We've taken a chunk of complex material, specifically pages 121 to 136 of a text you gave us, and our goal is to really distill it down to the essentials.
We want to highlight the most interesting and insightful bits without bogging you down with too much detail.
It's all about those aha moments, those flashes of understanding that make you think, wow, I never thought of it that way before.
Exactly. So today we'll be exploring some pretty heady stuff. The connection between knowledge and the divine.
The different ways we can understand the world, like through reason and intuition.
And then there's this idea of a fundamental reality that underlies everything.
Buckle up, this could get deep. But don't worry, as always, we'll make it clear and accessible no matter your background with these concepts.
Okay, let's dive in. The first big idea that caught my eye was this link between knowing and believing. There's this quote attributed to Newton. "Only a little knowledge distances one from God, but much knowledge leads one back to him."
Really makes you think, doesn't it? You'd almost expect it to be the other way around. The more you learn, the further you get from faith.
Right. But that's not always how it plays out. Many of history's brightest minds, those who pushed the boundaries of human understanding, were deeply spiritual people. The text even calls them the mystical pole of positivism.
Like Kepler, Pascal, Descartes. These weren't people shying away from questions. They were at the forefront of discovery.
Exactly. They didn't see their scientific pursuits and their spirituality as mutually exclusive.
It challenges that whole science versus religion narrative we often hear.
Totally. And speaking of challenging narratives, the text also talks about this early overconfidence among some proponents of purely scientific thought. It mentions Auguste Comte, who claimed we'd never know the composition of stars.
Famous last words, right? Because almost immediately after, we discovered spectral analysis, which allows us to do exactly that.
Yep. Quite a humbling reminder that we shouldn't be so quick to declare things unknowable.
It makes you wonder what other unknowables will crack wide open in the future.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this constant expansion of our knowledge, this awareness of the vastness of what we don't know, can actually deepen our sense of wonder and even strengthen our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It shifts the perspective from we've figured it all out to we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly. Moving on, the text dives into this really fascinating comparison between Eastern and Western thought, referencing Schlegel. He basically says that even the most profound European idealism pales in comparison to the abundant light and power of Eastern idealism.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it seems to suggest a fundamental difference, not just in scale, but in the very approach to understanding the divine. The text then goes on to explore Vedantic philosophy, which puts a strong emphasis on the individual self, the deepest part of who we are, and links it directly to the divine essence.
And get this, the text claims that no Western philosopher, even the giants like Plato or Kant, reached the same philosophical heights as those who developed Vedantic thought. That's a pretty provocative claim.
It really highlights the uniqueness of the Vedantic perspective.
And what's so special about this Vedantic view?
Well, it strongly emphasizes the concept of unity. It asserts this fundamental oneness, this one, that's both the origin and the ultimate destination of everything. Whether you call it Atman, referring to the individual self, or Brahman, when talking about ultimate reality, it's this underlying oneness that's key.
So it seems like this Eastern perspective starts with the idea of inherent connection and unity as a given, whereas Western thought often tries to prove or discover that unity.
You could say that. Different starting points, different paths, perhaps even different destinations.
Fascinating stuff. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how we as humans acquire knowledge. The text introduces this idea of being in prolongation, supreme, transcendental reality that underpins everything.
Think of it as the ultimate cosmic blueprint, the primary substance from which all laws and principles are derived. It's like the source code of the universe.
And from this being in prolongation, we get two interconnected aspects: the hypostases of substantial reality, being itself, and transcendental consciousness. The text makes it very clear that these two aren't separate, but are deeply intertwined.
Yes, consciousness is described as the very essence of being, and being is the foundation of consciousness. They're like two sides of the same coin, each defining and affirming the other. And then this unified absolute world, characterized by this inseparable link between being and consciousness, is contrasted with our everyday world, the world of individual beings.
Which is described as a field of consciousness that varies in its intensity and focus.
Right.
So our everyday awareness is actually a limited manifestation of something much grander.
That's the idea. The text distinguishes between cosmic consciousness, which is created, and the integral consciousness of the transcendental absolute, which is eternal and all-encompassing. Our human consciousness, the way we experience it, is seen as having a beginning, while the consciousness of the absolute is infinite and unchanging.
And within this realm of cosmic consciousness, humanity is presented as this focal point, with our essence as Homo sapiens, encompassing both of those fundamental aspects of being.
Exactly. And then there's this really intriguing formula that the text presents. The absolute and the illusion of the environment are opposite poles of the essence of each factor of nature. It sounds very deep, but what does it actually mean for us?
Well, it seems to imply that even though we might not be able to directly perceive the absolute in its purest form, we can understand how things in our experience deviate from that absolute prototype.
Right. By carefully analyzing the relative world around us, the world of appearances, we can gain insights into the nature of the absolute. It's like trying to understand the shape of a mold by studying the objects that are cast from it. You might not be able to see the mold itself, but you can infer its characteristics by examining its products.
So, by carefully observing and analyzing the world we experience, we can still learn something fundamental about its source, even if that source is beyond our direct grasp. Now, the text also delves into the how of acquiring knowledge, bringing in some interesting perspectives on intuition. It mentions Schopenhauer, who describes philosophy as a conscious and deliberate return to the data of intuition.
Schopenhauer was a big proponent of this idea that intuition, those flashes of immediate understanding, are a crucial source of philosophical insight. It goes beyond just logic and sensory observation. It's a different kind of knowing.
And then the text mentions Bergson in connection with intuition, suggesting that this wasn't just some isolated idea, but a broader recognition of its significance.
Exactly. Both Schopenhauer and Bergson acknowledge the limitations of purely intellectual approaches and emphasize the importance of this more direct, unfiltered form of understanding that intuition provides.
It's like that feeling you get when you suddenly get it, when something clicks into place in your mind without having to go through a step-by-step logical process. And then there's a quote from Pliny.
It positions Kabbalah as a system of knowledge that acts as a bridge between the intuitive and the rational. It's not just about feelings or hunches, but an intuitive grasp of truth that can then be understood and validated by the rational mind.
And this is then connected to the idea that God is the totality and primary source of the potencies of being.
Right. It suggests that the insights gained through Kabbalah are a direct apprehension of the fundamental energies and principles emanating from the divine.
Very interesting. And the text that brings in two phrases, the Kabbalistic ego sum qui sum, I am who I am, and Plato's the truly existing. Both seem to point to this fundamental self-existent reality that's at the core of everything.
Yes, these phrases, despite their different origins, converge on this core concept of a supreme, self-sufficient being, the bedrock of existence.
And the text highlights how the teachings of Egyptian hierophants, Kabbalah, and Greek philosophy all eventually flowed together, forming Neoplatonism and Gnosticism. And what's fascinating is that they all preserve this core doctrine of being as the supreme, primary, transcendental category of the Godhead.
It's like these different streams of ancient wisdom all converged on this same fundamental truth about the nature of ultimate reality. Okay, let's shift focus now and explore the nature of divine creation. The text presents this idea that the concept of world creation isn't an external act performed by a separate entity, but rather an inherent aspect of the self-consciousness of the Godhead itself.
It calls this the creating divinity.
Think of it as the divine reflecting upon its own infinite potential and through that very act of self-awareness bringing forth the universe. This creating divinity is the active manifesting side of the otherwise unknowable first cause.
So each individual aspect of creation is like an emanation, a reflection of this divine source. It paints a picture of deep interconnectedness where nothing is truly separate.
Exactly. Everything originates from and carries the imprint of the divine source. And the text highlights the crucial role of thought in this process. It acts as the link between the emanating center, the divine, and the manifested world we experience.
Which leads to the doctrine of Arcana the First. The creating divinity links the absolute and the manifested world.
Right. To truly understand creation, we need to understand this intermediary, this active aspect of the divine that bridges the unmanifest and the manifest.
It's like the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. And Arcana goes even deeper, revealing that the world's origin stems from this desire within the divine essence to know itself through creation.
It describes a transition from a state of world passivity to this dynamic state that we perceive as the triune creating divinity. So the act of creation is driven by this form of divine self-recognition, a desire for the divine to know and experience itself in all its fullness.
And the text mentions that this troika of the Absolute is mirrored in the dynamic ternary of the first three great arcana. It seems like the concept of three, of triads, is a fundamental pattern woven into the fabric of reality.
Yes, this foundational trinity appears again and again, not only in the structure of reality itself, but also in our human attempts to make sense of it. The text highlights this first divine ternary as being at the heart of virtually all religious traditions, even though it might manifest in different forms across cultures.
And gives some fascinating examples. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the three fates or parks in Greek mythology, the three Norns in Norse mythology. Even the daily journey of the sun, often represented by different sun gods like Osiris, Apollo, and Phoebus, is seen as reflecting this fundamental triadic principle.
Different stories, different cultures, but this shared underlying structure pointing towards the cyclical nature of existence: creation, preservation, and destruction or transformation. And then the text delves into the nature of individuality, stating that it isn't some absolute fixed state, but rather a manifestation of the one indivisible whole. So that deep-seated feeling we have of being separate, distinct individuals, it's not the ultimate reality.
Not in the most fundamental sense, no. The text describes individuality as having a purely abstract existence. It arises as a possibility within the vastness of divine consciousness, but it's not the whole story. Primary divine creativity is described as the revelation of these individual consciousnesses, these monads, which are like quasi-independent centers of awareness.
But even these seemingly independent monads, these sparks of individual consciousness, are still connected at a deeper level.
Absolutely. The text explains that the ongoing self-affirmation of reality happens through this universal family of monads and our interconnected consciousnesses. So each monad, in affirming its own existence and awareness, simultaneously affirms the existence and wholeness of the entire divine. It's this beautiful image of deep interconnected unity. Amazing. This leads us to the concept of the divine intellect and its role in creation. The text quotes Spinoza, saying, "De intellectum resceb ipso intellectus unum et idem esse." God's intellect and the things understood by it are one and the same. It's a very succinct and powerful statement of unity.
It is, and it emphasizes the inherent connection between the divine mind and the entire created world. The Kabbalistic understanding of the first three, Sephirot, Kether, crown, Chokmah, wisdom, and Bina, reason, beautifully echoes this idea.
The first representing knowledge, the second the knower, and the third the known.
Exactly. And the text clarifies that the creator's knowledge isn't like ours, where the knower, the object of knowledge, and the act of knowing are distinct and separate. In the creator, these are all one and the same. The creator is knowing, the knower, and the known all simultaneously.
So nothing truly exists outside of the creator, who contains the essence of everything within his own being.
Right. He is the original prototype, and all things exist within him in their purest, most essential forms. Creation, according to this view, achieves perfection through this union with its divine source.
And it's only upon separation, when we perceive ourselves as truly distinct and disconnected, that this perfection becomes veiled. So throughout our deep dive today, we've explored this intricate dance between profound understanding and spirituality.
We contrasted Eastern and Western approaches to the divine, dug into different ways of knowing, and even pondered the nature of creation and the divine intellect.
And it all seems to point towards this underlying unity, this interconnectedness of all things.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing the threads that connect us all back to a single source.
It's truly mind-blowing stuff. It's remarkable how these few pages can open up such vast perspectives on the very nature of reality itself.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, right? We take these dense and complex ideas and distill them down to their essence, hoping to spark some new insights and ways of seeing the world.
So, as you reflect on our conversation today, consider this. How does the interplay between your own logical reasoning and intuitive insights shape your understanding of the world?
Could exploring perspectives that go beyond purely rational thought offer you deeper insights into the fundamental nature of reality? It's something to ponder.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep exploring those uncharted territories of knowledge and understanding.
We'll be right here with you, ready to dive in again. See you then.